My name is Dale Deno. I grew up within a half a mile where we are right now. My family's been living here since about the 1860s. After I graduated from high school, I went into the military. I became a certified missile technician with the Nike Hercules system. After that, I worked for Miller Electric in Appleton as a machinist and a programmer and an automator for about 10 years. And at that time, I decided I wanted my children to grow up on the farm. So we bought a farm and we started milking cows. We milked cows for about 35 years till I retired. I went to an auction one day to buy a farm tractor. And I did end up buying the farm tractor, but there was a very strange machine sitting out there. There were very few people at the auction that knew what this was. And this was a corn shredder for cutting corn. Of course, there weren't too many people who knew what it was because there never were too many of these sold in Wisconsin. We simply couldn't justify buying one 100 years ago for the small amount of corn we had. Well, I went back to the auction a few days later to pick up a tractor I bought, and there was a junk dealer there loading the corn shredder onto his junk truck. He was going to junk it. And for some reason, I talked him into selling it to me. I didn't really know what it was. I assumed it was a shredder, but I had no idea who made it. And after I got home, I started doing research on it, and I found out it was made by a company called Appleton Manufacturing. And about that time, I caught the collector disease. Well, there was a gentleman called, I believe, John Van Nortwick. He lived in Batavia, Illinois, and had Illinois ties. He was involved with the canal system down in Batavia and the Fox River in Batavia. And then he became involved with the Fox River up here in Wisconsin after a while. And he went in to help put the canal and lock system in. He was friends with Mr. Rogers at the Hearthstone. And for some reason, he, in 1872, decided to start Appleton Manufacturing Company up in Appleton. Mr. Van Nortwick had a huge influence on the area. He was responsible for building the combined locks paper mill. He also was involved not only with the lock system, but he also started the electrical plant in Kaukauna. And like I said, he had a lot of influence on how the valley developed. And I know in the 1892 catalog, they said they had 200 employees. And I believe later on, they might have had as many as 300 employees and may have been the biggest company in Appleton at the time. And in 1894, Mr. Van Nortwick decided to move it back down to Batavia, Illinois. Well, I learned to recognize stuff that was made by them, which is really the hardest part of finding it, because after 100 years, most of the names and so forth are rusted over or the wood is rotten. And I believe I found an Appleton corn sheller, a small one. And I said after that, it just kind of got out of hand. Every time I found a piece of junk that might have said Appleton on it, I had to bring it home. After I was in it a while, I started displaying some of my stuff at the local steam shows. I handed out my ID card and so forth. Local people would start calling me or telling me about what they had at home in their shed or laying out in the orchard or on a fence line. A lot of times it ended up to be Appleton. Then after I was into it more, my stuff was featured in the Farm Collector magazine, which goes all over the country, and at that time people would call me from all over the country, either telling me about pieces they had or pieces their neighbor might have had. I've collected things from as far away as New York and so forth. Well, I do have catalogs that were put out by the company. The company usually put out a catalog every year back then, and there are very detailed pictures of them of the equipment in there. A lot of times I could pick up the painting schemes and so forth off of it. Sometimes I'll go to an auction or a museum and I'll see a piece and I will take a picture of it, and then I will copy it at home. I like to think I get it back within 90% of what it looked like originally. The most common piece that was made by Appleton was their #1 Burr Mill. They made 27 different models of Burr Mills for grinding grain. They say in their catalog they built 1,000 of them the first year. And I believe by 1892 they were building about 2,000 of them a year. So I assume that probably was their most popular product back in the beginning. There'd be 2 of these in here for grinding grain. And what was amazing about this, you could power it off of a very low source, almost anything you had. I have one that's powered off of a windmill or a horsepower or a treadmill, whatever you had. And I believe they might have made as many as 30,000 of these. You could make cow feed, pig feed, or flour and make a cake. What makes the patent different, they have blades in the middle to basically cut the corn, but around the outside it was very fine, and it was used to grind it to a very fine powder. I said you could make a cake and anything off of it. Another product that they made a lot of was the single hole corn shellers. Every farmer needed one of those and could afford one. When you went into their sales room or what, they would probably ask the farmer or the hardware store what they had to power it. And back in the beginning, did they have a water wheel? Did they have a windmill? Did they have a horsepower, a steam engine, a hit and miss engine? And then the equipment you bought from them would be geared or matched up to what you had at home. Catalogs that I have from the 1886 and so forth, one of their big products was selling the treadmill for horses to create their power. And much of their equipment was designed to run off of a horsepower. Mr. Van Noordwijk had ties to the Batavia area. Batavia was known for building windmills, and they also were in corn country where they had access to bigger farms and so forth. And I think Van Noordwijk wanted to expand his line into the corn collecting or corn picking and corn shredding and so forth. They increased the market, and another big advantage Chicago had was the railroad system to deliver all the equipment they made. In my books that I have in my catalogs, there is a special page in there. It's kind of a code page. If you're in the military, it might be like a secret communications page. But let's say I'm living here in Appleton and I broke a part I needed from Batavia. I would go on to the telegraph system and I would telegraph down to them what I needed. To do that, I would have to have the special code book. You do not send numbers over the telegraph, only letters. So in the code book, instead of, let's say, part K369, it would give you a 4-letter word like door, something like that. Okay, now you could, if you broke your machine in the morning and telegraphed it down to Batavia, Illinois, you might think, well, how long is it going to get to my place back up here? Well, the Chicago Northwestern had 2 freight trains running from Chicago to Green Bay every day through Appleton and Menasha and so forth. So it's conceivable you could get a part within a day or two. And when the Second World War started, I believe they started making artillery shells. And by the time the war ended, they had kind of lost their market to John Deere and McCormick and so forth, and they ceased to exist shortly after the Second World War. When you're a collector, you drag all kinds of things home and you look for the very unusual. My daughter stopped in at an antique store one day, asked if they had anything made by Appleton Manufacturing. And she gave me this as a Christmas present. It's a dinner bell. And for some reason, it got Appleton Manufacturing cast into it. I know they didn't sell bells. Was this made up as the factory dinner bell, or was it made maybe for one of their executives? I have no idea how it come about.